billionaire Sheikh asked the maid's daughter to play chess as a joke, not knowing she was a chess prodigy. "You, the American woman. Come here." Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil's voice cut through the hum of crystal glasses and quiet chatter like a blade. Susan Miller froze, the silver tray trembling in her hands. She was just the maid, nothing more than background to the billionaire's empire. But tonight, she was being pulled into the spotlight for one reason only: his amusement. "Yes, Sheikh al-Jamil? Sit," he ordered, gesturing to the onyx and ivory chessboard that gleamed like a stage waiting for its victim. "You will play with me. It will be educational." The wealthy guests leaned in, smirks on their lips, ready to watch her humiliation unfold. "I want to see how the simple American mind approaches a game of kings." But then, from the shadows, a small voice rose. "My mom is tired, sir, but I will play for her." The room fell silent. A 10-year-old girl had just challenged one of the richest men alive. What began as a cruel joke of power ended as a battle the world would never forget. This is the story of how a maid's daughter brought a billionaire to his knees. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. A little girl's promise would soon shatter a billionaire's world. Her mother was just a maid, invisible to the man who owned everything. But he was about to see the one thing he could never buy: her daughter's genius. The music was a soft murmur, a delicate thread of sound woven through the clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of expensive conversations. From his position on a white leather sofa that cost more than a family car, Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil surveyed his domain. His penthouse was the crown jewel of Dubai, a palace in the clouds with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing a glittering carpet of city lights that bowed before the Persian Gulf. Everything in this room, from the Italian marble underfoot to the abstract masterpiece on the far wall, was a testament to his power. He had built an empire from oil and ambition, and now, at 55, he was a man who had everything and felt nothing. Boredom was his most persistent enemy, a dull ache in the center of his soul that no amount of luxury could soothe. His guests were the usual collection of people who wanted something from him. There were European businessmen with nervous smiles, local dignitaries who spoke in practiced flattery, and women draped in jewels who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. They were all pieces on a board, predictable and easily moved. He found their company tiresome. His gaze drifted past them, scanning the room for any distraction. And then he saw her, Susan Miller. She was an American, a widow in her late 30s who had been cleaning his penthouse for the past year. She moved along the edge of the room with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible. She carried a silver tray, collecting empty glasses, her expression carefully neutral. To Khalid, she was just another part of the scenery, like the orchids in the corner or the silent air conditioning. He knew she had a daughter. He sometimes saw the small, blonde-haired girl waiting for her mother in the staff quarters, always with a book in her hands. He had never bothered to learn their names. Why would he? A cruel seed of an idea began to sprout in his mind. It was a perfect cure for his boredom. A little entertainment at the expense of someone who could not refuse. A demonstration of his power in a way that everyone would understand. He raised his voice, a rich baritone that effortlessly cut through the party's gentle hum. "You, the American woman. Come here." Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Susan froze, her hand hovering over a half-empty champagne flute. For a moment, she thought he must be speaking to someone else. But every eye in the room was on her, pinning her in place. Slowly, she straightened up and turned to face him, the silver tray held in front of her like a shield. "Yes, Sheikh al-Jamil?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Khalid smiled, a slow, predatory smile that did not reach his dark eyes. He gestured to the empty space on the Persian rug before him. "Put your tray down. You are finished with your duties for a moment." Susan's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She did as she was told, placing the tray on a nearby table with hands that trembled slightly. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. She could feel the stares of the wealthy guests, a mixture of curiosity and pity. "I have heard," Khalid began, his voice dripping with condescension, "that Americans believe they can do anything. That you are all ambitious and clever. Is this true?" Susan swallowed hard. She didn't know how to answer. I, I suppose we try our best, sir. Your best, he repeated, savoring the words. He pointed to a small, ornate table in the center of the seating area. On it sat a magnificent chess set. The board was crafted from polished onyx and alabaster. The pieces were hand-carved from ivory and obsidian, each one a miniature work of art. Do you know this game, Susan? Her mind went blank. Chess. She had played a few times with her father as a child, but she barely remembered the rules. A little, sir. Not well. Not well? Khalid echoed, a chuckle rising in his chest. The guests joined in with polite, sycophantic laughter. Perfect. I am in the mood for a game. I want you to play with me. I want to see how the simple American mind approaches a game of kings. Humiliation washed over Susan in a hot, sickening wave. Her face flushed. This was not a friendly invitation. It was a spectacle. He was going to make a fool of her in front of all these powerful people. She thought of her daughter, Abby, waiting in the small, sterile room down the hall. Abby was only 10, but she understood things. She would understand that her mother was being mocked. Sir, I can't, Susan stammered, her eyes pleading. I would not be a worthy opponent. I would only waste your time. Nonsense, Khalid boomed, enjoying himself immensely. It will be educational. For both of us. You will learn a lesson in strategy, and he paused for effect, looking around at his audience. I will be reminded of the natural order of things. Now sit. He pointed to the silk cushion on the floor opposite the chess table. It was an order, not a request. Susan felt trapped. To refuse would mean losing her job, the only thing that kept a roof over her daughter's head in this foreign city. To obey meant surrendering her dignity, piece by piece, on that black and white board. With her head bowed, she slowly walked to the table and sank onto the cushion. Her movements were stiff, her body rigid with shame. The Sheikh settled into his own seat, leaning back with the casual arrogance of a king about to execute a peasant. He began to arrange the white pieces on his side of the board, his long fingers moving with theatrical grace. You will play with the black pieces, of course, he said, not looking at her. It seems fitting. More laughter rippled through the room. Susan felt a tear slide down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, hoping no one had seen. She looked at the complex array of carved figures before her. The knight with its proud horse head. The stern, towering king. They looked alien and menacing. She didn't even know where to begin. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, waiting for her to fail. Mommy is tired. The voice was small, but it cut through the oppressive silence with the clarity of a bell. Every head swiveled toward the archway that led to the staff corridors. Standing there was Abigail Miller, 10 years old, with hair the color of pale corn silk tied back in a simple braid. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, were fixed on the scene in the center of the room. She was small for her age, and the simple cotton dress she wore was a stark contrast to the designer gowns and tailored suits of the guests. But there was nothing small about her posture. She stood straight and still, her chin held high. In her hand, she clutched a worn paperback book. Susan's breath caught in her throat. Abby, go back to the room. Now. But Abby didn't move. Her gaze shifted from her mother's pained face to the Sheikh's amused one. She took a step forward, then another, her worn sneakers silent on the plush carpet. She walked directly to the chess table and stood beside her mother. My mommy is very tired, sir, she said again, her voice unwavering. She has been working all day. It wouldn't be a fair game. Khalid leaned back, a look of genuine surprise on his face. He stared at the little girl, this unexpected interruption to his sport. And who are you to tell me what is fair? I'm Abigail Miller, she said simply. Susan is my mother. Since she is too tired to play, I will play for her. A wave of murmurs and whispers swept through the room. A child, a tiny, blonde-haired girl was challenging Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil. The absurdity of it was delicious. Khalid threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that filled the entire penthouse. You? He roared, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. A little girl wants to play chess with me? What will you do? Ask your dolls for advice on where to move the pieces. The guests laughed with him, their amusement now directed at this new, even more pathetic, challenger. Abby's expression did not change. Her blue eyes remained locked on his, steady and serious. I don't play with dolls, sir. I play chess. Something in her tone, a quiet confidence that was utterly out of place, made Khaled's laughter falter. He studied her for a moment. This was even better than his original plan. Humiliating the maid was one thing, but defeating her child, a child who showed such misplaced bravado, would be a story he could tell for weeks. Very well, he said, a cruel grin spreading across his face. If the little lion cub wishes to defend her mother, who am I to deny her? Sit. Let us see what you can do. Susan grabbed her daughter's arm. Abby, no. You don't understand. Please, just go back to the room. Her voice was a desperate whisper. She knew her daughter was bright. Abby loved to read, and she loved the old chess set her grandfather had given her. But this was Sheikh al-Jamil. This was not a game. It was a ritual of cruelty. Abby gently pulled her arm free. She looked at her mother, and in her eyes, Susan saw a flicker of something ancient and resolute. It was the same look her own father, the general, used to get before a difficult decision. It's okay, Mom, Abby whispered, her voice so low only Susan could hear it. Grandpa taught me how to deal with bullies. She then turned and, with a grace that seemed beyond her years, sat on the cushion her mother had just vacated. She did not look intimidated by the Sheikh, or the crowd, or the impossibly expensive chess set. She simply looked at the board, her small hands resting in her lap. The Sheikh made a grand gesture toward the board. The black pieces are yours. I hope you at least know how they move. A man near the window, a British diplomat named Mr. Harrison, whispered to his wife, "This is distasteful. The man is a brute." His wife nodded, her eyes full of sympathy for the small girl. Abby ignored the comments. Her fingers hovered over the pieces for a second, then she began to arrange them, each one placed precisely in the center of its square. Her movements were swift, economical, and sure. There was no childish hesitation. It was the first thing that gave the guests a sliver of pause. Khaled, however, noticed nothing. He was too busy soaking in the attention. "Let us make this a proper lesson," he announced to the room. "I will explain my moves as I make them, so the child can learn something. It is important to be generous with one's knowledge." He picked up a white pawn. "We begin with the king's pawn opening," he said, moving the piece forward 2 squares to e4. A classic. Aggressive. It shows an intent to control the center of the board from the very beginning. A strategy for life, not just for chess. He smiled, pleased with his own pronouncement. He looked at Abby, expecting to see confusion on her face. Instead, her eyes were calm, analytical. After only a moment's thought, she mirrored his move, pushing her own king's pawn forward 2 squares to e5. A standard, solid response. "Ah, she copies me," Khaled said with a chuckle. "Imitation is the first step of learning, I suppose." Very well. He developed his knight to f3, another textbook move, attacking her pawn. The room watched, holding a collective breath. They expected the girl to make a simple, defensive move, perhaps protecting her pawn with her own knight. It was what any beginner would do. But Abby did not play like a beginner. Her small hand reached out and moved her queen's knight to c6. It was not a defensive move. It was an active, developing move, part of a well-known but complex system. Khaled paused. It was a good move. A book move. He frowned slightly. She must have memorized the first few steps of a game, he muttered to himself. He dismissed it as a fluke. The British diplomat, Mr. Harrison, leaned forward. He had been a member of his university's chess club decades ago. He recognized the opening. It was solid. More than solid. It was professional. The game continued. Khaled made his moves with flourish and commentary, treating each one like a miniature lecture for the benefit of his audience and his student. Abby, in contrast, was a picture of quiet concentration. Her moves were quick, precise, and thoughtful. She did not waste a single motion. She did not look up at the crowd. Her entire world had shrunk to the 64 squares in front of her. With each move, a subtle shift occurred in the room. The quiet snickers faded. The looks of pity directed at Abby were replaced by glances of confusion, and then, of dawning surprise. The girl wasn't just playing, she was competing. Khaled's condescending smile began to feel tight on his face. He was still in control, he told himself. He was the Sheikh. She was the maid's daughter. He was simply letting the game go on for the sake of the drama. But a small, cold knot of doubt was beginning to form in his stomach. The girl's pieces were moving into positions of surprising power. They worked together, a silent, coordinated army that seemed to anticipate his every plan. He looked up from the board, and into her eyes. For the first time, he saw past the blonde hair and the simple dress. He saw an intelligence that was sharp and deep, a focus that was absolute. And he realized, with a jolt of shock, that the 10-year-old girl sitting across from him was not playing. She was hunting. While Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil thought about his next move, Abby allowed her mind to drift for just a moment. The scent of the Sheikh's expensive cologne was sharp and unfamiliar, a stark contrast to the memory it triggered, the faint, comforting smell of old books and pipe tobacco that always clung to her grandfather's study. 8 years before, when she was just a toddler, her father had passed away, leaving Susan a young widow with a mountain of worries. They moved in with Susan's father, General Robert Miller, a man the world knew as Iron Wall Miller for his unbreachable battlefield strategies, but whom Abby simply called Grandpa. Their house was small and modest, filled with the quiet dignity of a man who had served his country for 40 years. His greatest treasure was not his collection of medals, which he kept in a dusty box in the attic, but his library of books on history, philosophy, and military strategy. In the center of this room stood a small wooden table with a scarred and beloved chessboard. One rainy afternoon, when Abby was 4 years old, she had toddled into the study and pointed a curious finger at the carved wooden pieces. "What's that, Grandpa?" The general, a man with eyes that had seen too much but still held a soft light for his granddaughter, smiled. "That, little one, is a battlefield. It's a world where a pawn can become a queen, and a king can be trapped by a clever thought. It teaches you how to think." He began to teach her, not just the rules, but the soul of the game. He never let her win. Instead, he taught her how to lose. He taught her to study the board after every defeat, to understand her mistakes, and to learn from the strategy of her opponent. "Every loss is a lesson in disguise, Abby," he would say, his voice a low rumble. "The person who learns the most from their failures is the one who will never truly be defeated." By the time she was 6, she was no longer just learning. She was seeing patterns, understanding the flow of power across the 64 squares. Her grandfather gave her his old, annotated books. She devoured the games of the great masters, but it was her grandfather's own handwritten notes in the margins that she studied most intently. He had used chess to train his officers, to work through tactical problems he faced in the field. To him, it was never just a game. It was a language of logic and consequence. A year ago, just before Susan had taken the job in Dubai, the general had passed away. His last gift to Abby was the old, worn chess set. "The world is a bigger board than this one, Abby," he had told her, his voice weak. "You will meet many people who think they are kings. They will underestimate you because you are quiet, because you are a girl. Let them. Their arrogance is a weakness. It is the blind spot where you will find your victory. Be patient, be brave, and never, ever let them see you coming." A subtle shift in the Sheikh's posture brought Abby back to the present. He moved his bishop, placing it on a square that created a direct threat to her knight. It was a strong, aggressive move, designed to intimidate. He leaned back with a self-satisfied smirk, as if the matter was already settled. "You see," he said to the room at large. "You apply pressure. You force your opponent to react to your plan. Now, she must move her knight. She has no choice." His words hung in the air. The guests nodded, murmuring their agreement. They saw a powerful piece attacking a lesser one. But Abby saw something else. She saw what her grandfather had taught her to look for, the opportunity hidden within the threat. The Sheikh's bishop was powerful, yes, but it was also exposed. It had moved away from the defense of its king. Instead of moving her threatened knight, Abby's hand moved to the other side of the board. She picked up a simple pawn, a foot soldier worth almost nothing, and slid it forward 1 square. A gasp went through the room. Mr. Harrison, the British diplomat, shot forward in his seat, his eyes wide. "My word," he whispered. The Sheikh stared at the move, his smirk vanishing. "What is this foolishness? A child's mistake. I am attacking your knight, and you move a pawn?" He looked around for confirmation, but he saw only confused faces. "She is sacrificing a valuable piece for nothing." He eagerly captured the knight with his bishop. A free piece. An easy victory. Susan's heart sank. She didn't understand the game, but she understood the Sheikh's triumphant tone. Abby had made a mistake. She had given away one of her important pieces for no reason. But Abby remained calm. The sacrifice had been the key. It had lured the Sheikh's bishop into a trap. Now it was her turn. She moved her other knight, then her rook, then her queen. It was a cascade of movement, a swift and brutal dance of pieces that worked in perfect harmony. The guests watched, mesmerized. What had looked like a random, chaotic board a moment ago was now a perfectly constructed web. The Sheikh's pieces were tangled, blocked, and useless. His powerful bishop was now trapped, far from the action. And his king, which had seemed so safe and secure, was suddenly exposed and vulnerable. Khalid's face had gone pale. The blood drained from it, leaving a sickly, ashen color. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, dawning horror. He looked at the board, desperately searching for an escape. There was none. Every possible move led to disaster. The little girl, the maid's daughter, had not blundered. She had seen 10 moves ahead. She had laid a trap, and he had walked into it like a fool. His hands began to tremble. This couldn't be happening. He was Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil. He did not lose, especially not to a child. The room was utterly silent now. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Every guest was on their feet, craning their necks to see the board. They were witnessing the impossible. Abby made her final move. She slid her queen across the board, placing it on a square that sealed the king's fate. It was a move of beautiful, brutal finality. She looked up from the board, her clear blue eyes meeting the Sheikh's. "Checkmate," she said, her voice soft but clear. The word hung in the air for a full 10 seconds. Khalid stared at the board, his mind refusing to accept the reality of the pieces. The Black Queen stood like an executioner next to his fallen king. He was trapped, defeated, humiliated. Then, the rage came. It started as a low growl in his chest and erupted. "No," he roared, slamming his fist on the table. The delicate ivory pieces rattled. "Impossible." He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the marble floor. His eyes were wild, his face contorted with fury. "This is a trick, a fraud." Susan rushed to Abby's side, pulling her daughter behind her as if to shield her from the Sheikh's anger. "Sir, please. Silence," Khalid bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at Abby. "This girl did not beat me. She cheated. It is the only explanation." He scanned the room, his paranoid gaze landing on his staff, who cowered by the walls. One of you was helping her, sending her signals. Or perhaps, he whirled around to face Abby again. She has a device. An earpiece. Someone was telling her the moves. The accusation was so absurd that for a moment, no one knew how to react. A 10-year-old girl using secret technology to win a chess game? Mr. Harrison, the diplomat, finally found his voice. He stepped forward, his expression one of deep disapproval. "Sheikh al-Jamil, I must object. That was one of the most remarkable games of chess I have ever witnessed. What you call cheating, I call genius. There was no trickery here. You know nothing." Khalid spat, his pride completely shattered. He was not just a loser, he was a spectacle. All his important guests had seen him, a powerful billionaire, be systematically dismantled by a servant's child. His reputation was in tatters. He had to regain control. He had to rewrite the story. He fixed his furious gaze on Abby, who stood calmly behind her mother, her expression unreadable. "You think you are clever, little girl?" he sneered. "You think you can make a fool of me in my own home? I will give you a chance to prove your so-called genius." He paced the room like a caged tiger, his mind racing. "We will play again," he announced, his voice regaining its command. "But not here, in private. We will play in public, where the whole world can watch. We will play in the grand atrium of the Dubai Mall, on a giant electronic board for all to see. We will have experts there, masters of the game, to monitor everything, to search you for any devices, to ensure there is no cheating." He stopped and loomed over Abby, a menacing shadow. "When I defeat you there, in front of everyone, they will all see you for the little fraud that you are. And your mother," he added with a cruel twist of his lips, "will be scrubbing floors in the desert for the rest of her life. Do you accept my challenge?" Susan clutched Abby's hand, her own trembling with fear. "No, absolutely not. She is a child. This is madness." But Abby stepped out from behind her mother. She looked up at the towering, angry man, and the same quiet, unshakable resolve her mother had seen earlier returned to her eyes. It was the look of Ironwall Miller staring down an enemy charge. "I accept," she said. Abby's 2 words, "I accept," landed with the force of a physical blow. The defiance in them, so simple and so absolute, seemed to suck the remaining air from the penthouse. For a moment, the only sound was the faint, distant wail of a siren in the city below. Susan stared at her daughter, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Fear, fierce and primal, warred with a wave of overwhelming pride. This was her child, this small, fearless girl standing up to a tyrant. This was the general's granddaughter. But the general wasn't here to protect them. They were alone, two specks of dust in this gilded cage, and the cage keeper was enraged. Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil's lips curled into a triumphant sneer. He had her. The child's pride had been her undoing. He had turned his public humiliation into a masterstroke of public relations. Now, he was no longer the bully who lost to a child. He was the magnanimous patron, giving the little prodigy a chance to prove herself on a world stage. A stage he controlled completely. "Excellent," he said, his voice smooth as oil. He clapped his hands together, the sound sharp and final. "It is settled. My staff will arrange the details. The match will be in 3 days. That should be enough time for you to prepare." He let the word hang in the air, a subtle threat. He turned to his stunned guests, his composure fully restored. He was a king again, dispensing grand decrees. "My friends, you will forgive this interruption. A small matter of household discipline. Please, enjoy the evening. We have just been treated to a most amusing appetizer. The main course, it seems, will be even more entertaining." But the party was over. The mood had been shattered. The guests began to make their excuses, their polite smiles barely concealing their eagerness to leave and spread the story. They had come for drinks and networking. They were leaving with a piece of high-stakes drama that would be the talk of Dubai for weeks. They cast furtive, curious glances at Susan and Abby, the two figures at the center of the storm. Mr. Harrison was the last to leave. He approached Susan, his kind face etched with concern. "Mrs. Miller," he said in a low voice, "what the Sheikh is doing is unconscionable. Is there anything I can do? I have connections at the embassy." Susan, still in a state of shock, could only shake her head. "Thank you, sir. But he would only make it worse. We have to see this through." "Your daughter," Mr. Harrison said, his gaze shifting to Abby with a look of awe. "She is extraordinary. A lionheart." He then leaned in closer. "A word of advice. Khalid is a man driven by ego. This is no longer about chess. It is about power. Be very careful." He pressed a business card into Susan's hand before turning to leave. Once the last guest had departed, the penthouse fell into an unnerving silence. Khalid stood by the window, his back to them, looking out at his glittering kingdom. "You are dismissed," he said without turning around. "Prepare your daughter. If you try to run, I will find you. There is no corner of the world where my reach does not extend." Without another word, Susan took Abby's hand and led her out of the grand living area, past the silent, staring staff, and back to the sterile anonymity of their small room in the service wing. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, Susan's strength gave out. She sank onto the edge of the narrow bed and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Abby came and stood before her, waiting patiently. After a moment, she placed a small hand on her mother's knee. "It's okay, Mom." Susan looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Okay. Abby, how can this be okay? You don't know what you've done. This man is powerful and cruel. He won't just try to beat you. He will try to destroy you. He will humiliate you in front of the whole world to get his pride back." "I know," Abby said, her voice calm and steady. "That's why I have to play." "But why? We could have just left. We could have apologized." "He laughed at you, Mom," Abby said, her blue eyes holding her mother's. "He tried to make you feel small. Grandpa always said that you never let a bully win just by being loud. You have to stand up to them, not with anger, but with your mind." Susan saw the unshakable logic in her daughter's eyes. It was the general's logic, his unwavering belief in principle over comfort. She pulled Abby into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair. "You are too much like him," she whispered. "Brave and stubborn and much too smart for your own good." She held her daughter at arm's length. "Are you scared?" Abby considered the question for a moment. "The game doesn't scare me. It's just pieces on a board. The Sheikh, he's just a man. He's loud, but he's not smart. I saw it in his eyes when he played. He doesn't respect the game. He only respects himself. That's his weakness." Over the next 3 days, their tiny room became a strategic command center. Susan, her fear now channeled into a fierce maternal resolve, did her best to shield Abby from the storm raging outside. The story of the Sheikh and the maid's daughter was everywhere. It was on the news, on the internet, on the front pages of newspapers from Abu Dhabi to London. The narrative was spun exactly as Khalid had intended. He was portrayed as a generous, if eccentric, billionaire who had discovered a hidden talent and was giving a poor, gifted child a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Reporters and photographers camped outside the skyscraper, hoping for a glimpse of the mysterious 10-year-old chess prodigy. Khalid's PR machine worked overtime. They released glossy photos of him looking thoughtful over a chessboard. They arranged interviews where he spoke of his passion for the game and his desire to nurture young talent. He was the hero of the story. Abby was a curious footnote, a Cinderella of the chessboard, whose role was to be the catalyst for the Sheikh's magnanimity. Inside their room, the world of media and spin felt a million miles away. They ignored the television and the internet. Susan's focus was on Abby. She made sure her daughter ate well, slept enough, and didn't feel the crushing weight of the pressure building around her. For her part, Abby seemed almost serene. She didn't need a fancy computer or a team of grandmasters to prepare. She just needed the worn, wooden chessboard her grandfather had given her. For hours each day, she would sit on the floor, replaying the games of the old masters from memory, her small hands moving the scarred pieces across the board. She wasn't just practicing. She was communing with her grandfather. With every move, she could almost hear his voice, guiding her, reminding her of the principles he had taught her. Patience, Abby. See the whole board. Understand your opponent's mind. What does he want? What does he fear? The night before the match, Susan found she couldn't sleep. She sat on a chair, watching her daughter, who was fast asleep, her breathing soft and even. The sight of her small, peaceful face filled Susan with a love so fierce it was painful. She looked at the chess set on the table, the moonlight from the window glinting off the polished wood. In that moment, she understood. This wasn't about winning or losing a game. It was about her daughter refusing to be invisible, refusing to be a pawn in someone else's story. Abby was playing for her mother's dignity, for her grandfather's memory, and for her own quiet strength. And as Susan Miller watched her child sleep, she finally let go of her fear, replacing it with a quiet, steely faith. Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil thought he was arranging a public execution. He had no idea he had just set the stage for a revolution. The atrium of the Dubai Mall was not just a shopping center. It was a cathedral of commerce. A vast, three-story cavern of polished marble, gleaming glass, and cascading waterfalls. On a normal day, it was filled with the sounds of thousands of shoppers and the soft piped-in music of consumerism. Today, it was silent. An enormous crowd, thousands strong, packed every level, their faces a sea of craned necks and curious eyes. They leaned over railings, stood on tiptoes, and held up their phones, all of them focused on the center of the atrium. The fountains had been turned off. The stores were empty. The entire mall had become an arena. In the center of the ground floor, on a raised stage, sat 2 leather chairs and a large table. But the real focus was the colossal electronic screen that hung from the ceiling above them. It was a giant, glowing chessboard, each square the size of a small car. This was the stage Sheikh Khalid had built for his revenge. It was a spectacle of overwhelming force, designed to intimidate and to crush. Television cameras were positioned everywhere. 2 men sat at a commentary desk to one side of the stage, their hushed, expert voices broadcast over the PA system. One was a renowned Russian grandmaster, the other a well-known Emirati sports journalist. A roar went up from the crowd as Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil made his entrance. He was dressed in a pristine white traditional robe, looking every bit the benevolent king. He waved to the crowd, a confident, magnanimous smile plastered on his face. He sat down at the table, took a sip of water, and basked in the adoration of the audience. He was the master of ceremonies, the star of the show. A few moments later, a small door opened at the side of the stage, and Susan and Abby emerged. If the Sheikh's entrance was a thunderclap, theirs was a whisper. They were met with a wave of murmurs and 1,000 flashing cameras. Abby was wearing a simple blue dress. She held her mother's hand, her face pale but composed. She looked impossibly small in the vast, overwhelming space. As they approached the stage, they were stopped by two stern-looking officials in suits. One of them, a woman with a severe haircut, knelt down in front of Abby. "We are required to perform a security check, miss," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. She ran a handheld metal detector over Abby's small frame. Then, she gently checked her ears and the collar of her dress. The crowd watched in stunned silence. The Russian grandmaster at the commentary desk spoke into his microphone, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I have commentated on world championship matches for 30 years, and I have never seen a player search for devices before a game. Especially not a child." The search was a calculated piece of theater, one last turn of the screw by the Sheikh to plant the seed in everyone's mind that the girl was a potential cheat. But the act backfired. In the crowd, the mood began to shift from simple curiosity to a quiet, simmering sympathy. They saw a powerful billionaire using his might to intimidate a little girl, and it felt wrong. The search, of course, found nothing. Abby was led to her chair. It was so large that her feet dangled a foot off the floor. She looked across the table at the Sheikh, who gave her a dismissive, condescending wink. The head arbiter, a stern German man, stepped forward. "The rules have been agreed upon. This will be a standard game. 1 hour on the clock for each player. The Sheikh, as the challenger, has chosen to play with the white pieces. Are the players ready?" Khalid nodded impatiently. Abby looked out at the huge, intimidating crowd, found her mother's anxious face, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The arbiter pressed the master clock, and the game began. On the giant screen above, a white pawn moved forward 2 spaces. E4. The same opening as before. It was a message from the Sheikh. That first game was a fluke. This time, we play for real. A hush fell over the thousands of spectators. Every eye was on the small, blonde-haired girl. The world was watching, waiting to see what she would do. Abby took a deep breath, letting the roar of the crowd and the weight of the moment fade away until all that was left was the silent, 64-square world she knew so well. She reached out her hand and, with a steady, certain touch, she moved her piece. Abby's hand moved with a quiet certainty. She did not play the standard, expected response to the king's pawn opening. She did not mirror his move as she had done in the penthouse. Instead, she moved her pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense. A low murmur rippled through the knowledgeable members of the crowd. At the commentary desk, the Russian grandmaster sat up straighter, his eyes alight with interest. "The Sicilian defense," he announced, his voice booming through the atrium. "An ambitious choice. It is one of the most complex and aggressive responses to White's opening. It immediately creates an asymmetrical game. The girl is not playing for a draw. She is telling the Sheikh, 'I am not here to defend. I am here to fight.'" On the stage, Khalid's confident smile flickered. He had expected a simple, straightforward game where his superior experience would quickly overwhelm her. The Sicilian defense was messy, tactical, and full of hidden traps. It required precise calculation and a deep understanding of strategy. He had studied it, of course, but he preferred cleaner, more classical openings where the lines of attack were clear. This was the territory of grandmasters and calculating machines, not little girls. He scowled, dismissing it as a fluke. She had likely memorized the first few moves of a fashionable opening to look impressive. He would quickly draw her out of her memorized lines and into the deep water where she would surely drown. The game unfolded. Khalid played aggressively, launching a premature attack on the king's side, hoping to intimidate Abby with a show of force. He pushed his pawns forward, creating a phalanx aimed at her king. On the giant screen, his white pieces looked like an advancing army, a wave of power about to crash against a fragile shore. Abby, however, refused to be intimidated. She met his aggression with a calm, almost unnerving patience. While he was busy with his flashy, obvious attack, she was quietly developing her pieces on the other side of the board. Her moves were subtle, almost invisible to the casual observer, but the Russian grandmaster saw the genius in them. "Incredible," he murmured into his microphone, his voice filled with admiration. "The Sheikh is building a battering ram on the king's side, but the girl is constructing a fortress. And more than that, look." He pointed to the giant screen. While the Sheikh is focused on his attack, she is taking control of the center. She is building a foundation. He is building a weapon on sand. Susan watched from the front row, Her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't understand the intricate dance of the pieces, but she could see the story unfolding on her daughter's face. Abby's expression was one of pure, untroubled concentration. She was in her element, a mathematician solving an elegant equation. In contrast, the Sheikh was beginning to unravel. His initial confidence was curdling into frustration. His attack had stalled against Abby's unshakable defense. His pieces were overextended, his position awkward. He was a brawler who had thrown a wild punch and missed, leaving himself off balance and vulnerable. He began to fidget in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table, taking long, nervous sips of water. The crowd, which had initially been on his side, was now watching in a tense, expectant silence. They were starting to believe the impossible might happen again. The turning point came an hour into the game. Khalid, growing desperate, made a reckless move. He sacrificed a knight for what he thought was a decisive attack on her king. It was a gambler's move, a desperate attempt to smash through her defenses and end the game quickly. For a moment, it looked terrifying. His queen and rook were now bearing down on Abby's king. The Emirati commentator gasped. This could be it. The Sheikh's sacrifice may have broken through her defenses. Abby looked at the position for a full 5 minutes, the longest she had paused during the entire game. The silence in the atrium was absolute. Thousands of people held their breath. From the stage, Khalid watched her, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He thought he had her. He thought her childish mind had finally cracked under the pressure. But Abby wasn't cracking. She was calculating. She was looking past the immediate threat, deep into the heart of the position. She was hearing her grandfather's voice. Never be blinded by a threat, Abby. Look for the opportunity it creates. And then she saw it. A path. A narrow, beautiful, devastating path that no one else in the entire atrium had seen. Not the Sheikh, not the commentators, not the thousands of spectators. It was a sequence of moves so subtle and so profound that it took the breath away. Her hand moved. She didn't defend her king directly. Instead, she sacrificed her own rook, placing it on a seemingly meaningless square. A collective groan went through the crowd. The Emirati commentator threw up his hands. A blunder. A tragic mistake. Under the pressure, the child has thrown the game away. She has given up her rook for nothing. Even the Russian grandmaster looked stunned. I do not understand this move, he said, shaking his head. Only Khalid did not look happy. He looked terrified. Because in the instant she made the move, he saw what she had seen. Her sacrifice was not a blunder. It was a lure. A brilliant, fatal deflection. By taking her rook, a prize he could not refuse, his own queen would be drawn out of position, leaving his own king catastrophically exposed. His hand froze over the piece. He saw the trap laid bare before him. But it was too late. The entire structure of his game was a house of cards, and she had just pulled out the one card that made it all collapse. To not take the rook was to lose slowly. To take it was to lose instantly. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The confident smile was a distant memory, replaced by the slack-jawed mask of a man staring into the abyss. The crowd, sensing the dramatic shift, began to murmur. They could see it in his face. The Sheikh, the billionaire, the king of his universe, was lost. He took the rook. He had no choice. Abby's next move was a quiet, simple one. She moved her bishop. Her move after that was to advance a pawn. Her third move was to bring her knight into the attack. There was no rage, no triumph in her movements. It was just the calm, inexorable logic of checkmate. On the giant screen, the pieces moved with a terrible finality. The Sheikh's king was hounded across the board, stripped of its defenders, until it was cornered on the edge of the world. Abby picked up her queen. She slid it across the board, placing it on the final square. It was over. Checkmate, she said. Her voice was too quiet for the microphones to pick up, but the entire world saw it. On the giant screen, the Sheikh's white king flashed red, trapped, defeated. For a full minute, there was absolute silence. The crowd, the commentators, the Sheikh himself, were all frozen, united in a state of collective shock and disbelief. A 10-year-old girl, the daughter of a maid, had not only defeated one of the richest men in the world, she had done it on a global stage, outplaying him, outthinking him, and systematically dismantling his pride, piece by piece. Then, a single person began to clap. It was Mr. Harrison, the British diplomat, standing in the front row. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire atrium erupted in a thunderous, roaring wave of applause. It was not just applause for a brilliant game of chess. It was a roar of approval for the underdog, for the quiet courage that had faced down arrogant power and won. It was a celebration of a little girl who had reminded them all that genius, like character, has nothing to do with wealth or status. Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil sat frozen in his chair, his face a ghastly shade of white. The applause was like a physical assault. Every clap was a hammer blow to his ego. He looked at the celebrating crowd, at the flashing cameras, at the giant screen that displayed his humiliation for the entire world to see. He had wanted a public spectacle, and he had gotten one. But he was not the hero. He was the fool. He pushed his chair back violently, stood up, and without a word, without a handshake, without acknowledging his opponent, he stormed off the stage and disappeared, a king fleeing from his own fallen kingdom. On the stage, Abby finally looked away from the board. She looked out at the sea of cheering faces, and for the first time, a small, shy smile touched her lips. She saw her mother running toward her, her face a beautiful mess of tears and pride. Susan wrapped her daughter in her arms, lifting her off the floor. "You did it," Susan sobbed into her daughter's hair. "Oh, Abby, you did it." "We did it, Mom," Abby whispered back, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Grandpa would be proud." In the aftermath, Sheikh Khalid al-Jamil became a global laughingstock. The story of his arrogance and his spectacular defeat was not just news. It was a modern fable told and retold in every corner of the internet. Memes proliferated. His stunned, ashen face at the moment of checkmate became a viral symbol for hubris meeting its downfall. News outlets dubbed the match the Sultan's slaughter and the Maid's checkmate. He had tried to make a pawn of a little girl, only to discover he was the one being played. He had lost far more than a chess match. He had lost his dignity, and it was a loss from which he would never recover. He retreated into the gilded prison of his penthouse. The fawning guests and business associates who had once filled his rooms now found excuses to be unavailable. His calls went unanswered. His name, once a byword for power, was now irrevocably linked to public humiliation. He would spend his days pacing the marble floors, a king ruling over an empire of silence, haunted by the memory of a small, blonde-haired girl and the quiet click of a wooden queen sealing his fate. He had all the money in the world, but he had become a ghost in his own life, a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms and palaces he once dominated. For Abby and Susan, everything changed, and yet, the most important things stayed the same. The moment they stepped off that stage, they were engulfed in a storm of global attention. Offers poured in from all over the world. Corporations wanted to sponsor Abby, offering seven-figure deals to put their logo on her blazer. The most prestigious private schools in America and Europe offered full scholarships, promising to nurture her genius. Talk show hosts, documentary filmmakers, and Hollywood producers flooded them with requests, all wanting to package and sell their incredible story. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of opportunity that threatened to pull them under. But Susan, guided by a quiet, unshakable maternal instinct, became her daughter's fierce protector. She remembered the reason Abby had sat down at that chessboard in the first place, to defend her mother's dignity. It was now Susan's turn to defend her daughter's childhood. With the help of a lawyer recommended by a delighted and deeply impressed Mr. Harrison, she navigated the deluge. They accepted one offer, a full academic scholarship to a renowned but discreet school near Washington, D.C., a school known for nurturing gifted children without thrusting them into the spotlight. Susan took a quiet administrative job at a nearby university, a position that offered a comfortable life and, more importantly, a predictable schedule. She wanted evenings free for homework, weekends for trips to the park, and a life defined not by fame, but by normalcy. They left Dubai quietly, slipping away before the media frenzy could consume them completely. They settled into a modest, sunlit apartment with a small balcony perfect for growing flowers. For the first time in years, Susan felt a sense of peace. She was no longer a servant, living in the shadow of a wealthy master. She was just a mother, building a home for her daughter. Abby, for her part, handled her newfound fame with the same calm poise she displayed at the chessboard. She understood what had happened, but she didn't let it define her. The world might see her as a chess prodigy, a giant slayer, but she saw herself as a girl who loved to read, who was still learning long division, and who missed her grandfather dearly. She continued to play chess, joining the school club and occasionally participating in youth tournaments. She played not for the trophies or the accolades, but for the pure, quiet joy of the game, for the beautiful logic of the 64 squares. It was her connection to her grandfather, a private conversation that continued long after he was gone. 1 year later, a gentle autumn breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree outside their apartment window, casting dappled sunlight across a familiar wooden chessboard. Abby, now 11, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her chin resting on her hand as she contemplated the board. Her blonde hair was a little longer, and she was a little taller, but her eyes held the same deep, thoughtful concentration. Across from her sat Susan, a soft smile on her face. In the past year, Susan had insisted Abby teach her how to play properly. "If you're going to be a world-famous chess player," she had joked, "your mother should at least know the difference between a rook and a bishop." The lessons had become their favorite ritual, a quiet space of connection at the end of the day. "Be careful, Mom," Abby said, a playful glint in her eyes. "You left your queen exposed." Susan looked at the board and sighed dramatically. "You see, this is the problem with having a genius for a daughter. I can never win." They both laughed, a warm, easy sound that filled the comfortable room. Their life was simple now and profoundly happy. The noise of their Dubai adventure had faded, replaced by the gentle rhythms of school, work, and quiet evenings together. Abby was thriving in her new school, making friends who knew her as Abby the science whiz, not Abby the chess prodigy. Susan had found a community of friends at the university, people who valued her for her kindness and intelligence, not the title on a name tag. Occasionally, a reminder of their past would surface. A magazine article would rehash the story, or a stranger would recognize them on the street. But they had learned to navigate these moments with grace. The world saw them as the heroes of a dramatic story, but they knew the truth was quieter and more personal. Their victory was not the checkmate scene around the world, but this peaceful afternoon, this shared laughter, this simple, unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter. That evening, as Susan tucked Abby into bed, Abby looked up from her book. "Mom," she asked, "do you think the Sheikh ever plays chess anymore?" Susan paused, considering the question. She thought of the vast, empty penthouse, the man who had everything and nothing. "I don't know, honey," she said softly. "But I think, for some people, the game is only fun when they are sure they can win. They don't understand that the best lessons come from the games you lose." Abby nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. She understood perfectly. She closed her eyes, and Susan watched her for a moment, her heart filled with a love so deep it ached. Sheikh Khalid had tried to make her daughter his entertainment, but he had failed to see what General Ironwall Miller had always known, and what the world had now learned. True strength isn't about the power you wield over others. It is the quiet courage you find within yourself. It is the dignity you refuse to surrender. It is the love you fight to protect. And that difference defines not only who wins at chess, but who wins in life. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.